Okay, it's always an adventure getting on live. We are going to get set up here for our next interview, our only fans of Alex Suggs with Different DEI. She's going to jump on here seamlessly. Hello, we got some waves. So fun when people can join us in the middle of the day. I know it's not always easy, but we save this for our content, for our page, and there she is. There they are. See, we already started with a mistake. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
Hi.
Let me see if I can
Flip it.
switch. Yeah, let's see here.
Perfect. It's always fun getting like situated and like, is this working?
Yeah. And there we go.
Awesome.
A little bit higher up.
Thank you for joining us to kind of tell anyone who pops in, and as we save this for later, who you are. Alex is with Different DEI. I'll let them do the intro on all of the details of Different, but how we got connected to them was through another DEI person that had really gotten down and dirty with us on how to make sure our community was expansive and inclusive and all the elements and what people are searching for when they get on the app eventually when it's built. And that led us down the direction of talking to Different, and we've already learned so much already and can't wait to dive deeper with their team that we thought it would be a good chance to do our next one-to-one interview series with you all. And Milka couldn't join us today, but I don't even know how we were going to do 3 people anyway, so this is perfect. Alex, do you want to roll into a little bit about Different and about yourself as well to kind of let the people know who you are?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll start by saying this with my dog Tucker. He's on every call as well, so I try to be a little bit. But hi, I'm Alex. I am one of the co-founders of Different DEI, and I am a queer white individual. I also am neurodivergent, and I grew up in Boise, Idaho. And that took me to the East Coast. Now I'm back on the West Coast in San Diego. And I started this work back in about 2013, 2015, at the first kind of national spotlight on the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was a graphic designer at the time. And I was sitting in my office chair one day being like, I need to contribute to this world in a different way. I need to really ignite positive impact in my community and elsewhere. And I really didn't know how I wanted to go about doing that. And so I ended up quitting my job, going back to get my MBA with the purpose of really getting to diversity, equity, inclusion work. And at the time, I didn't know there was diversity, equity, inclusion consulting firms. I was like Googling it. I was like, oh, there's some firms out there that exist. And really that kind of set off my career of really wanting to tackle some of the issues that we're seeing, not only in society, but especially in our workplaces. In my first job, I wasn't openly out. I didn't feel comfortable being able to do that in the space that was provided. And I was like, there's more people that can't bring themselves to work, where their contributions are welcomed and accepted, where they're seen for who they want to be seen as. And so if I was facing those limitations as someone with immense privilege already, what limitations are others seeing in the workplace? And so flash forward to now, I spent the last 8 or so years in diversity, equity, inclusion consulting firms, and I met Milka and Grace, my co-founders, in that journey. And the 3 of us are super just values aligned in wanting to see this work move the needle more than it has historically. Coming out of 2020, a lot of organizations were like, okay, let's do this. Let's prioritize racial justice and racial equity. And then we get, into 2023 and not much movement has been made. And we're asking ourselves like why that is. And so we really found a difference. We're a queer, Black, Asian, non-binary, women-owned firm where we really are a partnership. Us 3 are coming together to leverage our own insights and bring other people along on the journey to do this work differently, to really come in and work with each organization as a truly kind of custom engagement where we're saying what's happening within your organization, what are your people specifically asking for, and how do we support you in your efforts long term, so we're not flash forwarding another 3 years, and there has been little movement really made. And so that's kind of what we're about. We work with startups as small as, one of our clients is 8 people strong, and then as big of organizations as a few thousand plus. And so really kind of run the gamut in who we work with, what industry we work within. And yeah, we're really excited. We've kicked off a lot of great projects and with great clients this quarter. And so
love that.
yeah.
2023 is off to a good start. That's always good to hear. And also you mentioned that you all came together and the synergy was just there. And that's such a beautiful thing when that happens. I've had other companies along this journey, and the ability to have co-founders, especially when it stems from something you're so passionate about, that are on the same page and also from various viewpoints, creates such magic within the group. So I think that's really great. We haven't gotten to meet the other co-founders yet, but hopefully we'll get to work with all of them when we bring different into the fold. And something else you touched on, you said, and I'm going to get things wrong. We're just going to put this out there to the community, and that's okay. We're all learning. We're all wanting to know better, do better, and be better. But you mentioned having some male-facing privilege. And your pronouns are they, them. And if you don't mind diving into a little bit of that, we've already had conversations surrounding this, but as the conversation moves forward for those viewing it now or later, just having a little bit of background on that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey with gender has always been kind of interesting. I grew up in my childhood, I was very much a tomboy, like very just, I remember my favorite school outfit was like cargo shorts one year. Like that was me. I read my like Air Jordans, like, and I remember growing up being attracted to women as early as, I want to say, like second grade. And so I was navigating this world of not only understanding like sexuality, and as a kid it's confusing in general, but also understanding like my gender identity of how I identify, feeling like, was I supposed to be a boy in this world? It didn't make sense. I was attracted to women, and I also wanted to dress, quote unquote, like a boy. And I was like, I don't know if I was just kind of messed up when I came out, and what do I make sense of this? And as a kid, that's really confusing when you don't necessarily have role models at that time, at least, that I can look up to and say, oh, there's a different way forward. And even voicing some of those things, there wasn't necessarily a way forward visibly for me. You go into like a Target, and historically when I was growing up, it was kids kind of split up by gender, and I didn't know where I landed. And thankfully my parents were really supportive, and my mom would take me to the little boys section, and we were able to kind of delve into that world early on. But it was only recently where the more and more I came into myself over the last few years, I really understood that, I don't, now having more terminology and understanding, I don't want to be identify as a male, but I also don't identify as a woman. And so what does that mean for me? And I've always seen kind of non-binary as like this in-between. And what I'm realizing about myself now, having just recently come out as non-binary and exclusively using they, them pronouns, is it's not necessarily space in between, it's a space outside of that I think about gender much more expansively and fluidly. And so for me, that was my journey. And my pronouns were she, they for quite a bit, and recently became they, them as I realized I wanted to step in my power. I think even me, I had a hesitation of putting the onus on other people. I didn't want to make it harder for other people. And I realized I'm like, well, most people actually want to know how to love me in the best way. And so if I can give them the language to do that and have them feel like they get to see me as I want to be seen, that's really powerful for both of us and for connection building. And so for me, that's how I've most recently identified. But even before I got to this point more recently in my journey as a person, I was always kind of androgynous, queer presenting since my very first kind of corporate job out of college. And it lent me some privileges in the sense of not only my whiteness, because that is absolutely my number one area of my identity that lends me the most privilege, but also my proxy to kind of maleness in the workplace. I felt like it was easier for me to find that affinity with male bosses or male colleagues because I didn't kind of sway over to this more feminine presenting persona that the other women in the office had. So I never really faced barriers to my advancement or opportunity, even as I present as a woman or identify as a woman. But I also recognize that in women-centric spaces, I also felt on the margins in those spaces at the same time, where women-centric spaces were predominantly for white, feminine presenting, straight, cis women. And so I was like, well, maybe I just kind of stay over here in this lane because I feel actually left behind in these efforts that are for all women, but they felt a little bit narrowly defined. And so when I think about women-centric or women non-binary centric spaces now, I really think about how do you think about that expansively? So trans women are included in that as women because they are women, and then also women of color especially because those are the folks always left further behind as white women advance. And so for me, it's kind of this interesting, nuanced lived experience I've had. And I love what you all are doing, that you're being a little bit more inclusive and thoughtful about how do we become more expansive when we think about women and non-binary folks.
Totally, because it's such a spectrum of where you feel comfortable and safe. And I think that's the most important element to us as we grow this community, and a place for you to say where you're going on the daily by who you're referring, but also trying to find something that fits for you. If you're a lesbian couple wanting to have kids, how can you find a doctor who will feel like a safe journey for you to go down that path together? If you have a limb difference, how do you find a trainer who's going to be considerate of that and actually an expert in working with you in that area to really get you the most out of that piece? There's just so many areas left out that you've taught us, that we've learned along the way, that either I haven't had to think about or someone else hasn't had to think about, that you go through when trying to find someone to work with, hires, where to work for, things of that journey. So really appreciate you sharing that journey and what that's looked like for you and how that's shifted. And in the context of when people are building spaces, companies, we have a lot of people here who have, their own either side hustles or businesses, large companies, but also just a lot of hype humans who are out here referring those that they love and who they love to go to. When you mentioned not feeling like there was a space for you in either spot, what resonates well for you when looking for a place that does feel like, oh, this is good, this is home for me, I don't feel like I have to be something I'm not, etc.? If I'm making sense on that question.
Yeah,
There's so many questions.
Yeah, for me, and something we prioritize in our work at Different, is the idea of psychological safety, which is a somewhat newer term that we've been seeing more and more in the DEI space.
Okay.
But when we say psychological safety, that's the ability to show parts of yourself within the workplace and not be fearful of doing so or fearful of how it will be received. But it's also being able to speak up with a contrary opinion, being able to add to a discussion, being able to voice a concern and have it be heard, provide upward feedback, for instance, knowing that if you fail, you're not going to inherently have your job on the line, but instead see that failure as a learning opportunity, right? There's a number of things that play into psychological safety, and that's in and outside of the workplace, right? When we think about, do we feel safe? And I think there's these interesting perspectives, especially, I attend therapy, and it's this idea about, well, it's our individual responsibilities for feeling safe. But at that same time, if we're operating within a system that doesn't feel inherently safe, the safe thing for us to do as individuals is probably to leave that system, right? But when every workplace has these perpetual cycles of inequities or biases or microaggressions, it can be very hard to say, well, I'm just going to opt out of this workplace and go to the next one, when those same patterns are probably going to present themselves, even if they present themselves differently. And so when we're left with that, knowing that these are rampant kind of things and patterns that we're seeing across workplace, it is actually the responsibility of a workplace and an organization to also provide that mechanism in that workplace and that environment that is psychologically safe for anybody of any background. When we think about why these workplaces were built, they were built by and for white people, white cis gender people, early on when we were, desegregated and all these other things. And these workplaces haven't adapted to the fact that we just kind of said, okay, now everybody can come and work within these workplaces, but we're going to continue to work as, you know, as we've done in the past, as status quo. And that doesn't leave a lot of room for people to show up as themselves if they are vastly different than probably like a white male, for instance. And so where does that leave us? It leaves us looking at not only the interpersonal dynamics within the workplace of, are people being able to communicate across difference? Do people have a sense of belonging? Do they feel like they trust their manager and their leaders and feel like the values align for the organization with their own internal values? And we look at the systems piece, right? Starting all the way from like recruitment, hiring to onboarding to performance management. Are those systems themselves paving the way for people like me to feel like I have equitable access to opportunity, that I feel I can get the appropriate feedback that I need to excel in my career, whether it's in the workplace or beyond? It's these things that it's that duality, right, of the interpersonal dynamics and systems piece that organizations really need to be thoughtful about and putting intention behind, because if you're not putting intention, we go back to our default, and those default is just inherently biased because we're born into a very biased, inequitable world as it stands, right?
100%. And seeing that for us, just with the research and building the community, and also having, you know, been in the workforce as women and having built community groups geared toward women or those that identify in safe space of feminine energy and support of the female in Denver, Bert and I both did. And seeing that those, you know, spaces still have a lot of room to grow, and we all do as people. And DEI has become a popular aspect from what we've all seen and grown through in the last few years. And what you all are doing, I love, because it's working for long term on these companies and consulting clients that you have versus just keeping it a trend. And that's one of the questions that we have is there, are you seeing that? How do we make it so it isn't just a trend for companies to jump on and share a flag on Gay Pride Month or a Martin Luther King quote on Martin MLK Day? Like, where are those societal turns you're seeing really affecting the work y'all are bringing to these businesses?
Yeah. I feel like it's pretty easy for us to spot when it's kind of someone looking for like a one and done initiative versus a long-term engagement. It's some of the questions that people even ask. But for us, you know, we use a model where it starts with yourself, of understanding like, what is your own into this work? And oftentimes people see DEI work as like for people unlike them. And when we say like other, it's like code language for people of color sometimes, or people with disabilities, or people of the LGBT community, right? When diversity, equity, inclusion work actually benefits everyone and is for everyone and requires the input and the shared ownership from everyone, right? And so that self is like that first piece that we really have to kind of lean into or unpack, like, and unlearn what we've been conditioned to believe as individuals, right? Me growing up in Boise, Idaho, I wasn't exactly having these conversations around race and inequities and systemic racism. These things weren't part of my purview growing up where I grew up. And so it was my job to actually lean and interrogate my own biases and my own privilege, and how do I then expand upon that and move into contributing better to a world that I want to live in and other people want to live in, right? And so we do self, and then we do team dynamics, organization, and then marketplace and like society. So when organizations are coming to us, sometimes they're looking at just a small subset of that model. So they might be looking at just team alone, where they're saying, okay, we want to do unconscious bias training. I'm like, cool, but unconscious bias training by itself is not going to inherently move the needle if the processes and systems themselves are just bias. You can have people that suddenly are challenging their own biases, but the systems they're operating within are still, you know, ridden with bias. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, you could have these systems and processes that have been set up to be super equitable, and on the other end, the people that are working within them are taking shortcuts, or they themselves are biased. And so it's kind of trying to pinpoint, like, well, where do we start?
Right.
And so in
where do you start?
Well, for us, I think it's really important that we start with kind of an initial intake. Like, we do a culture assessment, right? And we typically kind of start from the leadership down of understanding, like, what's going on in your workplace. And sometimes that's really insightful to people, that think they maybe know the issues or the root of the issues, and they actually don't. And so it's actually sometimes a surprise. Sometimes it's confirming what people already know. But for us, if an organization is willing to say, hey, let's air some of our dirty laundry and figure out what's going on, that's good indication that they're interested, that they're leaning in and curious about, hey, what's going on in the culture that maybe we need to improve upon. So that's kind of the first place that we would typically start. But then there's a next step of saying, okay, you now know, you have all this information. That's really important. Your employees are now wondering what you're going to do with it. If an organization stops there, you've actually maybe done more harm, right? You've gotten all this information, and we saw this a lot in 2020, where people did all these surveys, got all this information about, like, what do you want us to see us do? And then no action actually came from that. It was just a lot of intake, a lot of data gathering. And without that,
from those trying to get to that, they're not going up to that next level of like fierce compassion. Right. It's just
exactly. Yeah, and it's like, what actions are you actually taking from that? And so for us, it's really important to say, okay, now we're going to build a strategy, and that strategy also cannot sit on a shelf as like a nice piece of paper that then gets stowed away. It's really, the strategy is the start to the work, and then the implementation of that strategy and actually, like, you know, getting in the mud and changing your culture and doing the actual work that you set out to do, that's the work, right? And so it's matching intention with impact at the end of the day. And so for us, if an organization is not willing to kind of look long term and see that journey ahead of them, if they're just looking at, like, let's just do a one-off training, or let's just do recruitment and hiring, you're not going to make a lot of movement here. So for instance, I'll just use that as a last example here, and then I'll stop right now.
No, this is great.
With recruitment hiring, for instance, a lot of organizations come to us thinking, like, that's the issue. Like, we just need more diversity. Let's bring them in, figure out what we're doing that is either hindering that or what we can do to improve. And the thing that I always say is, well, would people actually want to work for you? If you're bringing them in, do you have any mechanisms in place to actually retain them once they're there? And if not, it becomes a revolving door where people are coming and going just as quickly, right? And you're not actually increasing diversity, and by no means are you really fostering inclusion, right? And so it's really having a more holistic understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion. And organizations don't have to come to me and my partners saying, like, we get it, we're all there. But there has to be an openness to understand, like, oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. We need to think about this differently, and we need to have a commitment to do things differently and not just stay in this one lane that we think will solve our issues.
Right. Otherwise, they'll be right back where they started, however long from the point when someone joined, to make it better.
Yeah.
How long do you typically work with a company? Does it vary? What's been that cycle for you all?
Yeah. So when it's like a full-on commitment, sometimes it's a training. We have a leader starter series, for instance, which we have a community cohort where people can send a couple of their leaders to join a community setting. And that is a 3-session program over the span of like a month. It's each quarter. But then if a whole team was to do that, it's 3 sessions or an in-person day session. And that can be a few weeks at a time. We hope they don't stop there, but we do believe that's like a first good step to start with leaders, because we need that tone set from the top. But with that, what we do like assessment and strategy, really it takes a few months, 4 or 5, 6 months. But really, we're usually partnering with organizations for at least a year. And then for a long-term engagement, it's year after year. You know, I am working with one company that I've been really kind of in and out, working with them for the last 3 years. And I think that's where I really love to be able to see, like, oh, this is where you started and this is where we are now. And your employees are feeling that shift. Yeah. So as a consultant, it can be hard when you're sitting on the outside and you're like, well, did you do the work? Are you making improvements? Yeah. And sometimes you just, like, you don't actually get those answers, right? But when you do get to have those long-term partnerships, which is really our goal, a little bit different, is to have those long-term clients. That's where you really get to see some of the magic that's being made. And that's been exciting for us too.
Love that. Well, honestly, it's so needed, and it's refreshing to have an open dialogue about it, and not only what your company is doing and your all's mission to make a difference in a larger impact of systems, but also just you getting honest about your journey and, you know, the fluidness that you had to have in order to be able to find happiness in a workplace, but to finally be at a point where you can stand in your power. I loved that terminology. I have a card back here reminding myself to do the same, because often as a woman, I find myself just trying to play small or conform in a different room to feel safe, whatever it might be. So appreciate the vulnerability in the conversation,
Yeah.
Alex. And I know
And
you
I'll
have hard stop coming up. So we always like to end on what referrals, and maybe one, and maybe a few, do you live and die by that you'll always refer for however long and you just can't get enough of this person in your life?
yeah. Real quick before I go there, just wanted to respond to the last point you just made.
Yeah.
Something that's been really important for my partners and me is to walk the talk. I think we've been in places where outwardly it can look like a company dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion work, but internally it's really kind of broken inside and messy. And for us, we three, as kind of born and raised as women, we wanted to do things differently in the sense that like we wanted to become the leaders that we would have wanted to follow. And I think that's really important for us because we rub up against each other all the time and we are mirrors to ourselves of like, I had a conversation yesterday where it's like, I've never actually learned how to depend on others. Like, I don't know how to release and relinquish some control because I've never learned to do that. I've always taken it on and just kind of been like, I have to do this. Like, I don't. And so we had to unpack that being like, they're learning how to support me and I'm learning to be like, I gotta let go and like let people in. And so there's a lot of conditioning that us three, we have shared conditioning and then we have our own experiences that we bring to the table. Not easy for us either. We're not kind of out here being like these DEI gurus that just know how to run a business. It's hard. And so we kind of know where other organizations are at too, especially women-led organizations that like you haven't even been able to experience sometimes those leadership positions because you've hit that glass ceiling again and again. And now you're starting your own thing, becoming a leader for the first time. Stepping into your power is scary as hell and it's hard. And we see that and we want to work with founders like that they know that we're going to resonate with their story. So I'll put that. And then,
I love that. That was so good. That was so good. I can relate to the control. Nobody but me, so we have to do all of it, right?
Yeah, hard. But
Okay,
I'll also say, yes, in terms of referral, one comes to my mind because we've worked with them a couple times because they are really amazing at training. Her name is Tisa Hami. And Tisa is the founder of Corsi Consulting. So they're one of our training partners. And she is just funny as hell. Like she was a stand-up comedian talking about the impact of like race and bringing that into storytelling to really push the envelope in a new way. And her company does any kind of trainings from interactive theater to live storytelling of speaking about her own experience as a way to open up the conversation. And it's really powerful. I love her work, and so definitely check her out. And if folks are interested in working with Different and Corsi, we really are a great partnership, and a few of our clients are excited to kind of see the joint efforts of us.
That's how we found you. So totally get that you have shared referral love, which is amazing. That usually happens that way.
Yeah.
Great. Love it. And if we want to find Different and, think about bringing companies out here wanting to bring you on to work with them, what's the best way to keep tabs and figure out that?
Yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram, different.dei, I believe, and then LinkedIn as well, different DEI. Our website is differentdei.co. If you put .com, you'll still get there. We kind of route you that way. And then, you can follow us individually on LinkedIn as well. I'm always happy to like hop on a call and talk with anyone that's interested. And I will say that, we get it when small organizations don't really have the budget, but they really want to be thoughtful. I mean, yourself included, right, Emily? It's
included. Like, we're going to get there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I'm really excited to talk with organizations that maybe aren't ready yet to invest, or they're just getting ready to invest and they have a really small budget to work within. Like, let's talk. Like, don't shy away from thinking about like, well, what can we do? Maybe it's an hour a month where we're just kind of deep diving into, hey, this is what's coming up. This is a challenge. Here's how to think about it differently. No organization is too small. We want to create impact, and the impact that we can create even in this community alone could be really huge.
Love that so much. Thank you for the time. And they're not wrong. Like, all of your co-founders share such good information on LinkedIn and such good content that continually helps the journey of that intrinsic learning and discovery. And you're just a wealth of knowledge. So Alex, I appreciate you. Thanks
Yeah,
for
thank
taking the
you.
patience with me and all my questions
Of
and
course.
making mistakes along the way, but you've just been such a light. So thank you for giving us your expertise for the afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and thank you for folks tuning in now and later. But definitely reach out. I would love to chat.
Love it. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks. Yeah.
Bye.